Hey there, welcome back. So today we're taking a deep dive into, well, some excerpts you've shared from Matthew Hussey's Love Life, How to Raise Your Standards.
Okay.
This book, it promises to help us navigate the world of dating and hopefully find lasting love.
Right.
But the whole time, keeping our self-respect intact.
Right.
And we've got our amazing expert here to help us, unpack all the key insights, figure out how it all applies to your life. So get ready, because we're about to explore some pretty thought-provoking ideas about, why being single can be even tougher than we think. And the sneaky ways our own stories about love can, trip us up.
Mm-hmm.
And why Hussey says that bad relationships are like crocodiles.
Ooh, it's definitely a book that makes you think differently about dating.
Okay.
Hussey's approach is all about understanding the psychology behind why we make the choices we make when it comes to love.
Okay.
And rewiring our brains so we can have lasting happiness and love.
Okay, so rewiring our brains. What does that even mean, in the context of dating? That sounds kind of intense.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. How many times have you found yourself chasing after someone who's clearly not interested?
Oh, way too many times, unfortunately.
Right.
Yeah.
Hoping they'll just suddenly change their mind. And that's kind of what he means. He says that a lot of the time, our instincts around love aren't actually our friends.
Okay.
It feels natural.
That instinct to try and win them over kicks in, even when it's probably not the best move.
Exactly. And he says that's actually a prime example of an instinct that can backfire, like pursuing someone who's pulling away.
Okay, yeah.
It might feel natural to try harder, but he argues that stepping back and letting them make the effort is actually more effective.
So it's almost like counterintuitive dating advice.
Mm-hmm.
It goes against what we often think we should do.
Yeah, it does. It all comes back to respecting ourselves and understanding our worth. We don't have to settle for breadcrumbs. But he doesn't just stop there. He also gives us a really interesting framework for understanding the different stages of a relationship. He calls it the 4 levels of importance.
4 levels of importance. That sounds intriguing. Break it down for us.
Okay. So he starts with level 1, which is simply noticing someone. You know they exist. You're aware of them. Level 2 is where things get a bit more interesting. This is attraction. You feel that initial spark.
Okay, I'm following so far. Basic awareness, and then that initial, there's something there, feeling.
Yes, exactly.
What happens next?
So level 3 is when things start to shift from that kind of fleeting attraction to something more substantial. It's the commitment stage where there's a mutual desire to build something together.
Okay.
It's not just about the initial spark anymore. It's about wanting to actually explore a potential future.
Got it. So it's moving past that initial crush phase and actually saying, hey, let's give this a real shot.
Yeah, exactly. And then finally, we reach level 4, which he calls compatibility.
Yep.
And this is where you really start to see if you can handle each other's quirks and differences long term, if you work well as a team, if you truly complement each other's lives.
So it's almost like a roadmap, for how a connection can potentially evolve into a lasting relationship. Mm-hmm. But I'm guessing it's not always a straight line from level 1 to level 4.
You're absolutely right. And he acknowledges that relationships, they rarely follow a perfect trajectory.
Yeah.
He dives into the messy parts too.
Right.
Talking about red flags and those inevitable kind of hard conversations that we all have to deal with in relationships. He really doesn't shy away from the complexities of dating.
Yeah, those tough conversations can be so difficult to navigate. I'm curious to hear what he has to say about them. What kind of red flags does he highlight in the book? Are there any that really stood out to you?
He covers a range of them. But I think some that I found particularly insightful were love bombing,
okay,
broken promises, and inconsistent communication.
Yeah.
These can be subtle at first,
right,
but they can be big indicators of potential problems down the line.
It's interesting because those are all behaviors that can be disguised as romantic or even passionate in the early stages. Love bombing, for example, can feel incredibly intense and exciting at first.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of these red flags and to trust your gut instinct.
Yeah.
He gives strategies for navigating those tricky situations and figuring out if someone's actions truly align with their words.
That makes sense. So it's about being aware of the potential warning signs, but also having the tools to address them, if they come up.
Exactly. He encourages open and honest communication, even when it's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
He reminds us that, relationships worth having are built on a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Speaking of difficult conversations, there's one in particular he tackles head on that I think will resonate with a lot of listeners.
Okay, I'm all ears. What is it?
He delves into the sensitive topic of the biological clock,
Right.
especially for women who want to have children.
Mhm.
It's something that can create a lot of anxiety and pressure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it can feel like there's this ticking clock that adds a whole other layer of complexity to dating and relationships.
Exactly. But what I appreciate about his approach is that he offers like practical strategies for managing that anxiety.
Okay, can you give us an example of one of those strategies?
Sure. One of his key takeaways is what he calls the Plan B approach.
Okay.
It's not just about having like a backup plan if things don't go according to a specific timeline. It's about taking control and creating options.
Right.
Whether that's exploring egg freezing, considering adoption, or simply being open to different paths to parenthood.
I love that. So it's about feeling empowered and not letting the biological clock dictate your choices or define your happiness.
Exactly. He emphasizes that choosing an alternative path is not settling.
Right.
It's about taking ownership of your future and expanding your possibilities.
That's a powerful reframing. It takes the pressure off and allows for a more expansive view of what's possible.
It does, and it actually ties into another one of his concepts that I think is really fascinating.
Okay.
He calls it identity confidence.
Okay, identity confidence.
Mm-hmm.
I'm intrigued. What exactly does that mean?
It's all about having a strong sense of self that doesn't solely depend on one area of your life, like your job or your relationship status.
Yeah.
He introduces this idea of the identity matrix, which is a way of understanding where we get our confidence from and how balanced it is.
So instead of putting all our eggs in one basket, we should be cultivating a sense of self that's multifaceted and resilient.
Exactly. He argues that when we rely too heavily on one area of our life for validation or happiness, we become vulnerable. He calls this a mutation, where one area becomes overly dominant. He uses a great anecdote about Karen Rinaldi, a successful publisher who decides to take up surfing, to illustrate this.
Okay, I'm always up for a good story. Tell me more.
So Rinaldi knew she was going to be terrible at surfing,
Uh-huh.
but she embraced that, like, suckiness
Yeah,
and went for it anyway.
I love that. It's about stepping outside our comfort zones and not being afraid to try new things,
Yes.
even if we're not naturally good at them.
Right. And what's interesting is that by embracing her lack of skill in surfing, she actually diversified her identity matrix.
Okay.
She wasn't just defining herself by her career successes anymore.
Yeah.
It was a way of proving to herself that she could be confident and find joy even when she wasn't, like, the best at something.
So it's about expanding our sense of self and finding confidence in different areas of our lives, which in turn can make us less reliant on external validation, like
Right.
from a romantic partner, right?
Exactly. And it all circles back to this idea of raising our standards.
Okay.
It's not just about being picky. It's about knowing ourselves, what we value, and what we're willing to accept or not accept in our relationships.
It's about setting those boundaries and not settling for less than we deserve. It sounds like Hussey has a lot to say about self-worth and how it impacts our choices in love.
He does, and one of the things he warns against is what he calls the cult of two, which is this idea of losing yourself in a relationship.
Okay, that sounds a little ominous. Tell me more about that. I think a lot of us have experienced that feeling of getting so caught up in a relationship that we kind of lose sight of our own needs and desires.
Exactly. And he warns against becoming so enmeshed with a partner that we sacrifice our own identity and sense of self. He even uses a rather striking analogy to illustrate this.
Oh, I'm intrigued. What's the analogy?
He compares it to a crocodile biting off another crocodile's foot.
Okay.
It might seem like a bizarre comparison at first,
Yeah.
but it highlights this potential danger of loving someone who operates by like a fundamentally different set of values, someone who might hurt you without a second thought.
Wow, that's a powerful image. So it's about recognizing when someone's values are so out of alignment with ours that it could actually be harmful to our well-being.
Exactly. And it reinforces the importance of having those hard conversations and setting boundaries.
Yeah.
It's about making sure our needs and values are respected in the relationship.
This is all so insightful. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of what Hussey covers in this book.
Oh, I know, right?
Yeah,
There's so much more to unpack, and I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of this deep dive.
absolutely. And speaking of deep dives, are you ready to go a little deeper into Hussey's approach to self-love?
Bring it on. I'm ready to dive in. So we were just talking about the cult of two and how easy it can be to lose ourselves in a relationship.
Right.
Well, Hussey has a really interesting perspective on self-love as like a way to combat this.
I'm really curious to hear his take on self-love, because it's a term that gets thrown around a lot these days. But I'm not always sure what it truly means.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of people. Hussey actually reframes self-love as an action, not just a feeling.
Okay.
He asks this thought-provoking question. We often love others unconditionally, so why not ourselves?
That's a great question. It makes you stop and think about how we often extend so much grace and understanding to other people, but we can be so incredibly hard on ourselves.
Exactly. He uses this really relatable analogy to illustrate this point. Like, think about a child's love for their like beat up stuffed animal.
Uh,
No matter how worn out or imperfect that toy is, the child adores it unconditionally.
I love that. It reminds us that we don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love, including our own love. It's such a simple analogy, but it really drives the point home.
It does, and it helps us see that self-love isn't about achieving some level of perfection.
Right.
It's about accepting ourselves, flaws and all.
This reminds me of something else Hussey talks about, which is the importance of intention in relationships. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. He makes this clear distinction between attention and intention.
Okay.
Just because someone gives us attention,
hmm
it doesn't necessarily mean they have genuine intentions for a future together. We've all probably experienced that at some point, getting caught up in the excitement of someone's attention without really considering their actions.
Oh, totally. It's so easy to get swept up in those early stages of dating when the attention feels good and exciting.
It is. But he emphasizes the importance of looking beyond the surface and paying attention to someone's actions. He talks about looking for signs of genuine intention, like consistency in their behavior, follow through on promises, and effort in building a future together.
So it's about those consistent actions that speak louder than words, right?
Yes.
Those small, everyday acts of commitment that really reveal someone's true intentions.
You got it. It's about recognizing the difference between someone who's, just casually interested and someone who's truly invested in building a relationship with you.
This ties back to what we were discussing earlier about rewiring our brains, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It's about training ourselves to recognize those patterns of behavior and not falling into the trap of romanticizing someone who's not actually showing up for us.
exactly. And speaking of recognizing patterns, Hussey has some really insightful advice on how to navigate those inevitable, bumps in the road that every relationship experiences.
Oh, you mean those moments when things get a little rocky?
Yeah.
Those disagreements or conflicts that can come up. Those are definitely not the most fun parts of being in a relationship.
No, they're not. But he argues that these challenges can actually be opportunities for growth and deeper connection.
Okay.
He stresses the importance of having those hard conversations,
Mm-hmm.
even when they feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, those difficult conversations are the ones we often try to avoid. But it sounds like he's saying they're crucial for building strong and healthy relationships.
He is. And he provides some really helpful strategies for approaching those conversations in a constructive way.
Can you share an example of one of those strategies? I think we could all use a little guidance when it comes to having tough conversations.
One of his key recommendations is to remove ego from the equation.
Okay.
Instead of approaching the conversation with blame or accusations, focus on understanding your partner's perspective and working together to find a solution.
So it's about shifting from an I'm right, you're wrong mentality to a we're in this together approach.
Exactly. It's about approaching the conversation as a team, not as adversaries.
Right.
And remembering that you're both on the same side, working towards the same goal, a stronger and healthier relationship.
That's a great reminder because it's so easy to slip into that defensive mode when we feel attacked or criticized, but it rarely leads to a productive conversation.
Right. And he also reminds us that those difficult conversations, while challenging in the moment, can ultimately be incredibly bonding.
Yeah.
It's in those moments of vulnerability and honesty that we truly see each other's character and commitment.
And sometimes it takes those tough moments to really strengthen the foundation of the relationship.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit, I know a lot of listeners might be curious about what he has to say about navigating breakups, because let's face it, they're an unfortunate reality for many of us.
Breakups are definitely one of the most painful experiences we can go through. It can feel like your whole world is falling apart.
Yeah.
Does Hussey offer any advice on how to cope with those feelings and move forward?
He does. And while he acknowledges that breakups are never easy,
Yeah.
he offers some really practical advice for healing and finding happiness again.
What are some of the key takeaways he offers? I'm sure our listener would appreciate hearing about them.
One of the most important things he emphasizes is the need to give ourselves time to grieve and heal.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay to feel sad, angry, or confused after a breakup.
Right.
Those are natural emotions. But he also reminds us that it's important to remember our worth and not let the breakup define us.
It's about allowing ourselves to process the pain, but also recognizing that we are so much more than this one experience.
Exactly. And he also talks about the importance of, taking care of ourselves during this time.
Yeah.
Surrounding ourselves with supportive friends and family, engaging in activities that bring us joy, and focusing on our personal growth.
So it's about self-care.
Yeah.
And rediscovering those things that make us feel good and whole again.
Right. And he also dives into the importance of reframing our thoughts after a breakup.
Okay.
He calls those negative beliefs that can spiral after a breakup emotional buttons.
Right.
Those automatic thoughts that can trigger feelings of worthlessness, self-doubt, or hurtlessness.
Oh, I know those emotional buttons all too well. It's so easy to get stuck in those negative thought patterns after a breakup.
Yes.
You start questioning everything about yourself and wondering if you'll ever find love again.
Exactly. But he encourages us to challenge those thoughts and create new positive emotional buttons to counteract the negative ones.
So instead of focusing on those self-defeating thoughts, we can actively choose to focus on more empowering beliefs that support our healing and growth.
You got it. For example, instead of thinking I'll never find love again, you might choose to focus on the thought, I am worthy of love and I'm open to finding it when the time is right. It's about shifting our mindset from scarcity to abundance.
It's about reclaiming our power and choosing to believe in our own worthiness of love and happiness.
Exactly. And it's about trusting that even though the breakup is painful right now, it's an opportunity for growth and learning.
Right.
It might not feel like it in the moment, but there are always valuable lessons to be learned from those experiences, even the difficult ones.
And sometimes those lessons are the ones that lead us to our greatest growth and ultimately prepare us for even more fulfilling relationships in the future.
You're so right. And there's another really practical tip that he offers for moving on from a breakup. And it might seem simple, but it can be incredibly powerful.
Okay, I'm curious. Tell us more.
He talks about the importance of removing reminders of the ex from our surroundings.
Okay.
Whether it's deleting photos, getting rid of gifts, or simply avoiding places that bring up painful memories.
It's about creating space for ourselves to heal and move forward without constantly being tried by reminders of the past.
Exactly. It's about taking control of our environment and creating a space that supports our emotional well-being.
Right.
It might seem like a small thing, but it can make a big difference in our healing process.
It makes sense. When we're constantly surrounded by reminders of someone, it can make it that much harder to let go and move on.
It really can. And, all of these strategies, from challenging our negative thoughts to creating a supportive environment, are really about cultivating that inner strength and resilience that allows us to navigate the inevitable kind of ups and downs of love and relationships.
It's about becoming more emotionally intelligent and self-aware, which are qualities that benefit us in all areas of our lives, not just our romantic relationships.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes Hussey's work so valuable. He's not just offering dating advice. He's providing tools for personal growth and self-discovery that can transform our entire lives.
It sounds like we've covered so much ground already, but there's still more to explore.
There is. We've talked about rewiring our brains, navigating hard conversations, and even surviving breakups. But there's one more concept I'm particularly excited to delve into.
Okay, I'm hooked. What is it?
It's this beautiful idea of becoming an author of magic in our own lives.
Okay.
It's about shifting our perspective and finding those moments of joy and wonder, even in the midst of the ordinary.
That sounds amazing. I can't wait to hear more about that. And I have a feeling our listeners are going to love this part of the deep dive. Okay, you mentioned this concept of becoming an author of magic, which sounds amazing. It feels like we've been on this journey of self-discovery, rewiring our brains and setting those healthy boundaries. Where does this idea of magic fit into all of that?
It's like the culmination of everything we've been talking about.
Right.
It's about taking all that self-awareness, that confidence we've been building, and channeling it into creating a life that feels truly magical.
Okay.
Even in those everyday moments.
So it's not about waiting for some grand fairy tale-like event. It's about finding the magic in the everyday.
Exactly. And it reminds me of something else Hussey talks about that I think is so relevant here.
Okay.
Embracing this concept of happy enough.
Oh, yes, that idea of finding contentment and gratitude
Yeah.
in the present moment rather than constantly chasing after more. I remember you mentioning that earlier and it really stuck with me. It's such a powerful shift in perspective.
It is. And what I find so interesting is that he doesn't present it as settling or being complacent.
Right.
It's more about recognizing that true happiness comes from within, not from like constantly striving for external achievements or possessions.
It's about cultivating that inner peace and joy that can't be shaken by outside circumstances.
Right.
It's like finding that sense of contentment that comes from appreciating what you have right now.
Right. And what I love is that he connects those two ideas, being an author of magic and embracing happy enough, in such a beautiful way. Because when we choose to focus on the good, to find those moments of joy and wonder in the everyday, it naturally leads to a sense of contentment and gratitude.
It's almost like a positive feedback loop, right?
Yeah.
The more we practice gratitude and look for those magical moments, the more we find them and the happier we become.
Exactly. It's about training our minds to see the world through a different lens, one that highlights the beauty and joy that's already present, even in the midst of challenges or setbacks.
And it sounds like it's an ongoing practice, not a destination we arrive at.
You're absolutely right. It's not like you wake up one day and suddenly, you're a master of creating magic and feeling happy enough.
Yeah.
It's something we have to cultivate every day,
Right.
like any other skill or habit.
Do you have any tips for how to actually cultivate this mindset of magic and contentment?
Well, he actually offers this like really simple yet powerful practice for cultivating gratitude, which I think is a great starting point.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about it.
He suggests taking a few moments each day to reflect on all the things you've overcome, all the ways you've grown, and to express gratitude for your own strength and resilience.
Wow, I love that. It's almost like a thank you note to ourselves, acknowledging our own journey and celebrating how far we've come.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from self-criticism, which I think most of us are way too good at, to self-compassion.
Yeah, because we're often our own worst critics, aren't we?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this practice of like thanking ourselves helps to counteract that negative self-talk and cultivate a more loving and supportive inner voice.
It's like rewiring our brains for self-love instead of self-doubt. And that self-love, as we talked about earlier, is so essential for healthy relationships.
You're so right. When we truly love and respect ourselves, we set the standard for how others treat us. We're less likely to settle for partners who don't mirror that same level of love and respect.
Which brings us back full circle to that core message of raising our standards. It's not about being demanding or difficult. It's about knowing our worth and making choices that reflect that worth, both in our relationships and, in every other area of our lives.
You said it perfectly. It's about creating a life that feels authentic and fulfilling, one that aligns with our values and brings us joy. And it's about remembering that we're all worthy of love, both from others and, most importantly, from ourselves.
This has been such an incredible conversation. I feel like I've learned so much from diving into these excerpts with you. It's clear that Matthew Hussey offers so much more than just dating advice. He's offering like a framework for personal growth and creating a life filled with love, joy, and even a little bit of magic.
I couldn't agree more. It's been such a pleasure unpacking these ideas with you and our listener.
Before we wrap things up, I want to pose one final question to our listener. Something to ponder as they continue on their own journey of, raising their standards. What's one standard you're committed to raising in your love life after hearing this deep dive?
That's a great question. It's something for all of us to consider as we navigate this complex world of love and relationships.
And on that note, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Matthew Hussey's love life. It's been such a joy exploring these concepts with you both.
Thanks for having me.
And to our listener, if you're ready to explore these ideas further, I highly encourage you to check out Matthew Hussey's book or any other resources he offers. Until next time, remember to keep raising those standards and creating a love life that truly lights you up.